Hello, beautiful people. Welcome to Drawing Down the Stars and Searching for Dragons. I'm Snappy, and I'm joined today by my good friend Graham. How you doing, Graham?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
I'm really excited, a really good mood today. I am so happy to talk about Poe. So, Poe is kind of like, as a kid, was one of the first real serious poets that I ever got into. I distinctly remember seeing that episode of The Simpsons on Halloween when they did the Raven and just being absolutely blown away. And then at a quite young age, I got a collection of his collected works. Most of them went over my head, but I remember being just like engrossed in the images regardless, like Telltale Heart really scared the crap out of me. The House of Usher got to me. Conqueror Worm, that poem, I was like, whoa. How about you, Graham? How did you discover Poe? Do you have any memories to Poe's work, or what are your thoughts on Poe?
Yeah, so I was introduced at a young age because my parents had a big hardcover, complete works of Poe, all of his poetry and short stories and stuff together in one anthology. And so I would leaf through it all the time, and I did, a lot. It's because I was quite young. I didn't absorb all of it, but I love The Mask with the Red Death. That's my favorite Poe story.
Good
Um,
choice.
Yeah, and the Black Cat, and some other classics as well. And his poetry stuck with me as well. I can't remember the names of a lot of the works, but just the dreamscape and the haunting atmosphere that he evokes always mesmerized me.
He's truly a master of the macabre and of the gothic. He really brings that imagery to a fore, and he's perfect. I really wanted to talk about him on our show, not only because I believe he is a dragon, and we're going to get into that because there's some really cool stuff in the two pieces I selected. We're going to have to do multiple episodes on Poe because there's just so much depth here, and I want us to dig in and have fun and really explore the pieces. So this episode, we're not going to explain too much of Poe's history. We may do that in the future. I really want to focus on these two pieces I selected, which are Ligeia and Dreamland. And they both are about dreams, about invoking the muse, about this kind of divine, monstrous feminine. It's both alluring and seductive and terrifying. And this image, too, of the death and resurrection, I really think is unique about Ligeia. Well, he also does it again in Morella. That's a play we'll have to get in, or a short story we'll get into another time because it deserves its own thing. And Poe actually said in the letter to a friend that Morella was kind of a refining of Ligeia, similar ideas. So, but Poe is also someone who is mentioned by several of our people we featured already. So Kawine had said that his earliest introduction to poetry was through Poe, and that was his first love that got him inspired to write literature. We know that Charles Baudelaire basically worshipped and idolized Poe to the point of amazement, and
Isidore de Casse, the Comte de l'Outre-Monde, cites Poe as a major influence, as well as Artaud.
yeah. Do you know offhand what Artaud says about Poe?
Um, Not really, but he had great praise for him for his works, and said that few compared, and that his
Awesome.
poetry was like, and his stories were on like another echelon.
Right. This is the thing, a lot of people in history get kind of overrated. In my mind, Poe is not one of them. They deserve to be in the upper echelons of the literary canon. And for me personally, I love their art. It's a lot of fun. It's spooky. It's magical, and we're gonna get into it today. So I'll bring up. We have a little slideshow prepared for you. Oh, sorry, guys. And then we'll go through the two pieces. And I have sort of this. I really want to focus on the idea of the muse and this invocation of the muse, of this dark, monstrous, feminine, of that fiery, beastly, feminine image. And that I connect to, like Medea and to Cybele and to Lady Babylon, to the Red Goddess, because I believe that Poe, especially in Ligeia here, is really invoking this kind of image. And I want to take us through these two pieces, talk about some of the history and ideas behind them, and get into it. So before we do that, though, Poe was born in 1809 in Boston, and he died quite young in 1849. And in that time, he was famous because he was arguably the first professional American writer. And this caused him a lot of like financial hardship, but he managed to subsist and live his life entirely on his merit of his writing. And his death is one that's kind of shrouded in obscurity, because he dies kind of drunk or on something, screaming out someone's name, and then his death certificate and all related medical information has been lost. It's just gone. So conspiracies run wild with this, right? Why was he screaming a man's name? Was he poisoned? But at the same time, Poe was a known alcoholic, a known opiate user, and he really struggled with drug abuse throughout his whole entire life, right? So the first thing we're going to get into here is the poem Dreamland. And this is where Poe takes us into his dream worlds, into the depth of his imagination. And it's really kind of a magical poem, but there's one distinct image, or a couple here. This was a painting I found on a website called the Edgar Allan Poe Library. And this was painted in regards to Dreamland. And I just love this idea of this giant idol of this like mother goddess queen figure sitting in the mountainous throne. It's really evocative of that Rhea energy, that Cybele energy, just really a beautiful piece. But when I was looking around into Dreamland, interesting enough, I came across a Stub article. I posted a link for it in the comments here. And it was an article talking about how Poe quotes Seneca's Medea in the play Dreamland. So when we get to in the poem, when we get to the poem, you'll see, but Seneca uses this phrase, Ultima Thule, or Ultima Thule, but he only uses it once in his writings, and it's sung by the chorus in the tragedy of his play Medea. And here's the line. It says, "There will come an era in the following years, during which Oceanus will loosen the chains of things, when Tethys will reveal new worlds, and Thule not be a limit." And this is something we know that Poe read, because it's quoted, this exact line, in a book that he had about the life of Christopher Columbus, which he also quotes from in other places. And we also know that Poe knew Latin and was deeply invested in the Greek and in the Roman kind of writing. So it's potential that potentially he even read Seneca's Medea directly. But either way, he's referencing this idea of the ultimate Thule, this land outside, this beyond that will be revealing itself through prophecy. And he kind of uses this image to talk about his expanding imaginative dreamscapes that he's creating, these new worlds, these new lands. And it's, I think, contrasting Christopher Columbus actually setting out to explore, new land masses and discover new cultures and stuff. But I thought it was a really great connection to this kind of to that Medea, right? So it helps my my later argument here. I think that's pretty interesting, eh?
Yeah, very.
Okay, so here's the poem. I have a full recording on our YouTube channel if you want to hear it said a little bit better. But it says, "By a route obscure and lonely, haunted by ill angels only, where an eidolon named Night on a black throne reigns upright, I have reached these lands but newly, from an ultimate dim Thule, from a wild weird clime that lieth sublime, out of space, out of time." So an eidolon named Night. I wanted to point that out. An eidolon, that's the same thing as a what do we call that? Oh my god, an egregore that we hear in the Latin that like Crowley talks about. This kind of spirit, this daimonic almost spirit that's created through thought and through worship, this giving birth to that kind of image. And then this night, this goddess of the night, right? That's again evocative of this mother goddess, that womb energy. And it's also going to relate later to Idea when we get to the nymphs and stuff. But I just really thought this was awesome. Out of space and out of time, too, breaking free of ionic life, out of that world. And again, this brings us to that Saturnian goddess who is outside of space and time, right?
And the line itself is outside of the rest of the form.
That's a good point, right? It's interesting. And, it sets up immediately to this connection to Medea right at the first opening lines. Okay. Bottomless vales and boundless floods, and chasms and caves and titan woods, with forms that no man can discover, the tears that drip all over. Mountains toppling evermore into seas without a shore, seas that restlessly aspire, surging unto skies of fire. Lakes that endlessly outspread their lone waters, lone and dead, their still waters still and chilly, with the snows of the lulling lily. So just beautiful, incredible imagery, but also this darkness, right? Like the caves, the chasm, the titan woods. Again, this takes me into that imagery of like the hymn to the mother of all gods, and to the Greek with the chaos being the chasm, the deep dark, the caves, the place where the nymph lives, these titanic trees, the titanic woods, that ancient past, and these alternative gods, right? Gods of the underworld who have lost and been othered, like Kronos himself. With, and it's just such powerful imagery too, lulling lilies and these mountains and stuff, just beautiful. So, by the lakes thus outspread, their lone waters lone and dead, their sad waters sad and chilly, with the snows of the lulling lily. By the mountains near the river, murmuring lowly, murmuring ever. By the gray woods, by the swamp, where the toad and the nude encamp. By the dismal tarns and pools. Again, we get this image of the water being associated with death, and it being next to this mountain, right? The mountain, I always think of the great goddess. Where dwell the ghouls, by each spot the most unholy, and each nook most melancholy. There the traveler meets aghast, sheeted memories of the past, shrouded forms that start and sigh as they pass the wanderer by. White-robed forms of friends long given, in agony to earth and heaven. So seeing the dead as these memories, these shrouded forms in their death shrouds, all white as they wander past him in these deep gray woods, it's like he's, through his imagination, he's gone beyond the world, entered into the underworld, and he's perceiving the dead. He's gone with the power of the imagination into the depths, and he's now seeing all of this dark forms and interacting with the dark mother herself. He's gone into that abyss, into that chasm, that cave, right?
I love it.
For the heart whose woe are legion, 'tis a peaceful, soothing region. For the spirit that walks in shadow, it is an El Dorado. But the traveler traveling through it may not dare, not openly view it. Never its mysteries are exposed to the weak human eye unclosed. So wills its king, who hath forbid the uplifting of the fire of the fringed lid, and thus the sad soul that here passes beholds it but through darkened glasses. Here we're getting like, this is such Odysseus imagery, right? Entering into the underworld, but he can't see, right? He doesn't have the eyes to see like Tiresias or the dead do, and he's confronted with that dark mist, and the king who won't allow him. This is our reference to Hades, to Pluton, right?
I'm also feeling like some Artaud influence here, where like he perceives these like initiates or like the secret order that runs society is preventing him through magic to like see himself and speak the truth. You know, they're imposing these darkened glasses upon him with their magic.
Oh wow, yeah, that's an interesting take. I like that. That's cool. I also look at this, it's an El Dorado, right? That again takes us to this Hades Pluton image, because Pluton and his son Plutus, these are the gods of wealth, right? The power and the fruits of the earth. Hades is a stern god, but he's a bountiful, rich god,
Mm-hmm.
It's powerful imagery of going into that darkened underworld, at least, and then all kinds of things on top of it. Here's the last lines. By a route obscure and lonely, haunted by ill angels only, where an eidolon named Night on a black throne reigns upright, I have wandered home but newly from this ultimate dim Thule. So because he didn't persist, he went to the underworld and returned, right?
And the journey has transformed him. I wandered home but newly.
Right. He's been totally transformed, and because he didn't try to stay or to perceive it too closely, he was able to go into those dark depths and come out okay, unscathed. It's really this transcendent trip into the depths of the underworld, into that chasm of the great night, of the great mother, that other, and then coming back out of it, perceiving the dead in the bridal or in the death shrouds. Powerful, powerful poem. Right? What do you think?
I love it. My first introduction to it was your reading of it, which is beautiful, by the way.
Oh, thank
And
you.
yeah, it's a wonderful poem. Very evocative.
Right? And I thought it was really good for setting us up with this, showing us how the depth of Poe's knowledge of that kind of Greek, the subtle references that he's making with Medea, and that he is taking us into this underworld, that this is his dreamland. His dreamland is this exploration of the depths of the unknown. And this is an image that was produced for Ligeia that I just really, really like. And it's amazing. You see the man worshiping her and this radiance and these shining, stark, black, yet glowing eyes, which is so important to the coming story. So Ligeia is kind of a short story that's about a man who is married to this magical, inspiring person that winds up dying, and then he gets married to another woman, and then she winds up also dying, and some crazy weirdness unfolds. But before we get into the story, I want to set us up and continue with some of this Greek magical imagery. So first off, Poe calls his short story Ligeia. This is a Greek word. This is a Greek name. When I was searching around for this, I found this entry in theoi.com under the sirens. It says, Ligeia, the shrill sounding, occurs as the name of a siren and of a nymph. And they cite Homer and Virgil. They also included this really interesting passage from Lycophron talking about the Greek Ligeia. So I'm going to just read this to us here. It says, and he, Odysseus, shall slay the triple daughters, sirens of Tethys, son Achelous, who imitated the strains of their melodious mother Melpomene. Self-hurled from the cliffs' tops, they dive, with their wings into the Tyrrhenian sea, where the bitter thread spun by the Morai, the fates, shall draw them. One of them, Parthenope, washed ashore the tower of Phileros, shall receive, and Glanus wetting the earth with its streams, there the inhabitants shall build a tomb for the maiden, and with libations and sacrifice of oxen shall yearly honor the bird goddess Parthenope. And Leucosia shall be cast on the jutting strand of Anepius, and shall long haunt that rock that bears her name, where rapid is and neighboring Laris pour forth their waters. And Ligeia shall come ashore at Terina, spitting out the wave, and her shall sailormen bury on the stony beach nigh to the eddies of Oceanaris. and an ox-horned Ares shall lave her tomb with his streams, cleansing with his waters the foundation of her whose children were turned into birds. And there one day, in honor of the first goddess, Parthenope, of the sisterhood, shall the ruler of the navy of Popsops, historical Athenian admiral Diotimus, array for his mariners a torch race, in obedience to an oracle which one day the people of the Neapolitans shall celebrate.
Wow.
The reason why I included this is I really want you guys to pay attention to a couple of images, okay? These daughters, the three sisters that are sirens, and then the three sisters that will come. So this is referencing the daughters of Delos, which are the three children of the king Aeneas, and they were blessed by Dionysus in order to be able to transform items. One of them could turn water into wine. One of them could turn anything she touched into wheat. The other one could make olive trees grow. All clear drug references. And, you know, it's referencing here that from this nymph, right, from these sirens, gives birth to these women who will then be transformed into birds. Later in the story with these daughters, in order to save them, Dionysus transforms the daughters of Delos into doves, right? A symbol of Aphrodite, but also of this freedom so that they can experience this freeness. So this, again, we're connecting to these sirens, to these daughters of Delos. Just remember this because these are references that will come up. And we have more of this nymph imagery as well. So I wanted to talk and mention who Medea's mother was. And this is something that I thought was an interesting connection. So Medea's mother is Idea. And this is from Theoi. It says, was an Ocean nymph of the town of Colchis in Aia, at the eastern end of the Black Sea. She was the wife of Queen Aeetes and the mother of the witch Medea. Idea's name was derived from the Greek word eido, meaning to see or to know. She probably personified the power of the eye, which in Greek superstition was the source of a witch's supernatural powers. As an Ocean nymph, she was presumably also the naiad of the main well or fountain of Colchis. The marriage of founding king and local naiad is a common motif in Greek myth. And also she's often regarded as this dark star, this light, this sun, and this eye. So there's all of this kind of image connected to these ocean nymphs, to this dark mother goddess energy that Poe is going to be referencing and talking about in the story. I also wanted to point out these are passages I took from the Hymn to the Mother of Gods by Julian the Apostate. And this is a really important piece of writing that talks about the ascent of Attis, how Attis goes into the cave, is corrupted by the nymph, and then through his love of the goddess Cybele breaks free, castrates himself, and then is transformed by her and is able to achieve apotheosis and gain ionic life. And this is kind of like a central magical image. And it connects directly to what Poe is going to be getting at with these nymphs and what we're going to hear and read in the story. So, only as far as this did the mother of the gods permits this fair intellectual god Attis, who resembles the sun's rays, to leap and dance. But when he passed beyond this limit and came even to the lowest region, the myth said that he had descended into the cave and had wedded the nymph. And the nymph is to be interpreted as the dampness of matter, though the myth does not here mean matter itself, but the lowest immaterial cause which subsists prior to matter. Indeed, Heraclitus also says, it is death to souls to become wet. We mean, therefore, that this Gallus, the intellectual god, the connecting link between forms embodied in matter, beneath the region of the moon is united with the cause that is set over matter, but not in the senses that one sex is united with another, but like an element that is gathered to itself. So I wanted to really highlight this image of the person being driven down into the wetness, into the dampness, and that this dampness is akin to death and is death, you know, because we're going to see this image of the muse, and then it's going to be contrasted with this image of the nymph. We have two feminines. We have the fiery, destructive, monstrous feminine of the mother goddess, contrasted with this death image and this rejection of the nymph that we're going to see play out in the story. So continuing in the hymn to the mother of the gods, so we understand what the fiery feminine is doing. It says, since, however, it was necessary that his limitless course should cease and halt at last, mighty Helios, the Corybant, who shares the mother's throne, and with her creates all things, with her has providence for all things, and apart from her does nothing, persuaded the lion to reveal the matter. And who is the lion? Verily, we are told that he is flame-colored. He is therefore the cause that subsists prior to the hot and fiery. And it was his task to contend against the nymph, and to be jealous of her union with Attis. And who the nymph is, I have said. And the myth says that the lion serves the creative providence of the world, which evidently means the mother of the gods. So this image of the beast that comes in to disconnect us and upset us from the nymph, from that matter, to take us away from death and to bring us out into ionic life. And this beast image, right, those are the lions or the dragons of Medea or the lions of Cybele. And we're going to see these two images come up again. And one last passage here from the hymn to the mother of the gods by Julian. O mother of the gods and men, thou that art the assessor of Zeus and sharest his throne, O source of the intellectual gods that pursuest thy course with the stainless substance of the intelligible gods, that dost receive from them all the common cause of things, and dost thyself bestow it on the intellectual gods. O life-giving goddess that art the counsel and the providence and the creator of our souls, O thou that lovest great Dionysus and didst save Attis when exposed at birth, and didst lead him back when he had descended into the cave of the nymph. So pay attention to this needing to be saved from being in the cave of the nymph, from this death, this female personification of death and destruction. Okay, and then having to come out of it through this monstrous beast, right? And what do we also know when we're talking about that beast in the ancient Greek? It's often related to the theriac, to the drugs itself. Okay, so that's another important image to keep in mind when we get to reading the story, this theriac that brings ionic life and saves us from the nymph. Okay. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about Medea. This was an interesting article that I found, and I link in the sources, that talks about the image of the eye as related to Medea in Apollonius of Rhodes' Argonautica. And it says, Medea is the granddaughter of the sun, whose descendants are easily recognizable in the brightness of their eyes. Apollonius makes Medea's eyes frighteningly bright by describing her glances as flashes, armaria gamata and maria gai, words that belong to the brilliant rays of the sun. Moreover, her eyes are feared by her fellow Colchians, who shun them. We see the terrifying power of her gaze when she shoots Talus with rays from her eyes and he collapses. So I just want you to connect these images of Medea, this fearful mother, and these transformative, powerful eyes that are both at once a chasm of destruction and representative of the abyss, but also of these witch glare of that sun's ray, of that Medean fire, you know? So this is all just set up for my reading. What do you think so far, Graham? Am I making sense?
I'm loving it. This is fascinating.
Okay. Because when you read it, you're going to see how much is encoded deep into this story from all of these Greek myths. It's wild. So before we jump ahead, I just wanted to include this final thing here. Again, talking about the eyes, which are such a central point of Ligeia. This on the left is a painting of Poe's late mother. She died when he was quite young. She died only at the age of 24 or 23. And as we can see, this is the only painting they had of her, and the eyes are almost out of proportion, are abnormally large. And he describes Ligeia as having those kind of eyes, and this connection to that mother image is important. And he talks about in a couple of his letters how Ligeia came to him in a dream of eyes. So I thought that was just an important connection of this, also this loss of the feminine, because Poe suffers so much loss in his life. He loses his mother, he loses his wife Virginia, he loses eventually his cousin. There's a lot of loss, and it becomes such a central theme of his writing. He believed that the highest form of poetry was talking about the death of a beautiful woman, and it's such a central element to all of his work. But we'll continue here. We're now going to get into the story proper. So we're just going to kind of read the entire story of Ligeia, and I'm going to pause and point out stuff, and we're just going to have some fun with it. First off, this quote is not a real quote by Glanville. When I was searching out, it's not a real quote, but this is Poe putting his words into the mouths of an authority so that it's given this kind of prestige. That name, Joseph Glanville, doesn't mean much to us, but in his day, this was a philosophical authority that would have given weight to this quote here, right? It says, "And the will therein lieth, which dieth not. Who knoweth the mysteries of the will with its vigor? For God is but a great will, pervading all things by nature of its intentness. Man doth not yield himself to the angels, nor unto death utterly, save only through the weakness of his feeble will." Joseph Glanville. And regardless of who says this is such a powerful quote, talking about the magic of the will and the power of the will to even overcome death, which is going to be an essential theme throughout this story. So let's continue. Do you have any comments, though, before I dive in?
No, let's go for it.
Okay. "I cannot for my soul remember how, when, or even precisely where I first became acquainted with the Lady Ligeia. Long years have since elapsed, and my memory is feeble through much suffering. Or perhaps I cannot now bring these points to mind, because in truth, the character of my beloved, her rare learning, her singular yet placid cast of beauty, and the thrilling, enthralling eloquence of her low musical language made their way into my heart by paces so steadily and stealthily progressive that they had been unnoticed and unknown." So I just want to pause right there. She's coming in almost like a dream, almost like a magical image, the flow of low musical language. I also thought that was kind of ironic because Ligeia literally is a shrill sound, yet sings this heartwarming low tone, right? Makes his way into his heart and progressively took him over, almost like a drug connection as well. "Yet I believe that I've met her first and most frequently in some large old decaying city near the Rhine. Of her family I have surely heard her speak. That it is of a remote ancient date cannot be doubted." So this is all kind of interesting, is that he cannot remember where, like, he doesn't know fully about her. This is the love of his life, this beauty that he's enthralled by, but he doesn't remember where they met 100%. And he doesn't even know what her last name is or anything about her connections. Kind of weird. "Ligeia, Ligeia, in studies of a nature more than all else adapted to deaden impressions of the outward world, it is by that sweet word alone, by Ligeia, that I bring before mine eyes in fancy the image of her who is no more. And now while I write, a recollection flashes upon me that I have never known the paternal name of her who was my friend and betrothed, and who became the partner of my studies, and finally the wife of my bosom. Was it a playful charge on the part of my Ligeia?" So he doesn't even, he wonders if she never bothered to tell him. "Or was it a test of my strength of affection that I should institute no inquiries upon this point? Or was it rather a caprice of my own, a wildly romantic offering on the shrine of the most passionate devotion? I but indistinctly recall the fact itself, What wonder that I have utterly forgotten the circumstances which originated or attended it? Indeed, if ever she, the wan and the misty wind Ashtafet of idolatrous Egypt presided, as they tell, over marriages ill omened, then most surely she presided over mine. Okay, so I want to talk about this image of Astrophet. So this is Astaroth, Astarte, right? He connects it to Egypt here, but that particular word is connecting to that evening star goddess Astarte of sex and war, right? This is a prominent connection right at the start to that red goddess we're talking about, that Medea, that Lady Babylon energy. And he connects it directly to her. And he's wondering if it's like he has this passionate devotion and obsession with her because she is this kind of goddess, right? There is one dear topic, however, on which my memory fails me not. It is the person of Ligeia. In stature she was tall, somewhat slender, and in her latter days even emaciated. I would in vain attempt to portray the majesty, the quiet ease of her demeanor, or the incomprehensible lightness and elasticity of her footfalls. She came and departed as a shadow. I was never made aware of her entrance into my closed study, save by the dear music of her low, sweet voice, as she placed her marble hand upon my shoulder. In the beauty of face, no maiden ever equaled her. It was the radiance of an opium dream, an airy and spirit-lifting vision more wildly divine than the fantasies which hovered vision about the slumbering souls of the daughters of Delos. Well, okay, so there's so much here. We're going to have to pause. First off, I want to just point out all of this idolatrous language that she's of this lightness. First, she comes in sort of like with this lightness, and she departs as a shadow, which is mysterious and magic-like. But then her beauty is unequaled, and it's this like perfect marble-likeness, and it's the radiance of an opium dream. So she appears to him through the use of the drugs. So in my mind, what I'm seeing this is a deep connection to the muse, right? He's talking about how the muse is coming into his life as this powerful, profound, idolatrous image, this imagined form, right? An airy spirit, lifting vision, more wildly divine than the fantasies which hovered vision about the slumbering souls of the daughters of Delos. So this is important if we go back to that image I read near the beginning with that bird goddess and the sirens with Odysseus. The daughters of Delos, those are those three daughters of the king Aeneas, who were blessed by Dionysus to be able to transform things into wine, wheat, and into an olive tree. But they're also transformed into the image of a dove. So he's connecting them distinctly, this image of Ligeia, to these nymphs, to this feminine magic of transformation, and to the image of Dionysus. Yet her features were not of that regular mold which have been falsely taught to worship in the classical labors of the heathen. There is no exquisite beauty, says Bacon, Lord Verulam speaking truly, of all the forms and genera of beauty, without some strangeness in the proportion. So I love that line for a couple reasons. First of all, Bacon is Lord Verulam. Lord Verulam is a pseudonym. And Francis Bacon is like a 15th century academic, philosopher, helps give birth to science, a very staunch Anglican. And one of his most famous things is he talks about this idea of like the idolatry of the mind. So one of the ways he was able to promote science was to get Christians behind him in this concept about like breaking free of the imagination and trying to prove things concretely, and this idolatry of the mind. So while we have this beautiful idea of the strangeness and this connection to Ligeia, I feel like Poe is being kind of funny because he is clearly idolizing Ligeia in this form of this mental dream image. And then he's quoting Bacon, who's like totally anti doing that, you know? So I just wanted to point that out. I thought that was fun.
Yeah, that line also brings to mind. There's an art movement uh, called Verism, where it's like it was prominent in Roman sculpture at a certain point, where it was actually not about exaggerating the beauty of the person, but incorporating the flaws of them to portray them how they truly are. So, like, they'd have the statues of warts and wrinkles and marks and things like that, because that would be the true beauty of the person, right?
Right. It's also this it's also this thing to reality, right? Absolute perfection is not something that can exist. And if even if you achieved it, it would transform into non-perfection very quickly, right? So learning to embrace the strangeness, the uniqueness, the unique patterns, that's where the real beauty lies, is in that unfolding. This is a very again, like magical kind of image, transformative image about approaching real beauty rather than idolizing a concrete form. You're idolizing the real, right? So let's see what he says about what's strange about Ligeia's beauty. Yet, although I saw that the features of Ligeia were not of a classic regularity, although I perceived that her loveliness was indeed exquisite, and felt that there was much strangeness pervading it, yet I had tried in vain to detect the irregularity and to trace home my own perception of the strange. I examined the contour of the lofty and pale forehead. It was faultless. How cold indeed that word when applied to a majesty so divine. The skin rivaling the purest ivory, the commanding extent and repose, the gentle prominence of the regions above the temples, and then the raven black, the glossy luxuriance, naturally curling tresses, setting forth the full force of the Homeric epithet hyacinthine. So I just want to talk about that because that's a powerful image to invoke in a tragedy. Hyacinthus. Do you know who Hyacinthus is?
No, I just know the hyacinth plant.
Right? Well, hyacinth plant gets its name from the myth of Hyacinthus. Hyacinthus was like a beautiful young man who Apollo fell in love with and wanted to, be lovers with. But the west wind gets jealous. And one day they're playing discus, and the west wind blows the discus off course, and it strikes Hyacinthus and it kills him. But in Apollo's great pity, he decides to transform Hyacinthus into the hyacinth plant. And he inscribes, they say, on the leaves, the Greek word I, which is like the scream, the morning scream, So it's this deep, dark image of mourning and loss. That's, so to say that she's hyacinthine is like there's this unattainable love. There's this perfected beauty that you cannot have, and to obtain it is almost to destroy it, right? And again, we have all this, she's the purest ivory, right? This marble, right? Like she's almost like an idol. So I looked at the delicate outlines of the nose, and nowhere but in the graceful medallions of the Hebrews had I beheld a similar perfection. There were the same luxurious smoothness of surface, the same scarcely perceptible tendency to the aquiline, the same harmoniously curved nostrils speaking the free spirit. I regarded the sweet mouth. Here was indeed the triumph of all things heavenly, the magnificent turn of the short upper lip, the soft voluptuous slumber of the under, the dimples which sported and the color which spoke, the teeth glancing back with a brilliancy almost startling, every ray of the holy light which fell upon them in her serene and placid, yet most exultingly radiant of all smiles. I scrutinized the formation of the chin, and here too I found the gentleness of the breadth, the softness and the majesty, the fullness and the spirituality of the Greek, the contour which the god Apollo revealed but in a dream to Cleomenes, the son of the Athenian. And then I poured into the large eyes of Ligeia. So this is another brilliant image here, revealed by Apollo to Cleomenes, the son of the Athenian. So Cleomenes was one of the instigators to create democracy in Athens, so the story goes. He forges some people say it was a forgery, some people say it was real, but had a prophecy from the oracles at Delphi that said that the Spartans could not enter into the oracle and receive an oracle. And this is like just a nod to that. So again, we're getting this nod to the Delphian oracles, to this bringing about of freedom and transformation, of democracy, and of potentially a falsehood too. Because Cleomenes, right? It's debated whether or not this was a real prophecy or one he just made up. And I just love, again, right? He has this incredible depth in poetry to her image, her physicality. He remembers every aspect of it, yet he doesn't know her family name or where they met or how she came into his life.
Pretty wild.
Right? Now we get to the most important of her aspects, the eyes. For eyes, we have no models in the remotely antique. It might have been, too, that in these eyes of my beloved lay the secret to which Lord Verulam alludes. They were, I must believe, far larger than the ordinary eyes of our own race. They were even fuller than the fullest of the gazelle eyes of the tribe of the valley of the Nor Jahad. Yet it was only at intervals and moments of intense excitement that this peculiarity became more than slightly noticeable in Ligeia. And at such moments was her beauty in my heated fancy. Thus it appeared perhaps the beauty of beings either above or apart from the earth, the beauty of the fabulous Huri of the Turk. The hue of the orbs was the most brilliant of black, and far over them hung jetty lashes of great length. The brows, slightly irregular in outline, had the same tint. The strangeness, however, which I found in the eyes was of a nature distinct from the formation or the color or the brilliancy of the features, and must after all be referred to the expression, word of no meaning, behind whose vast latitude of mere sound we entrench our ignorance of so much of the spiritual. The expression of the eyes of Ligeia. For how long hours have I pondered upon it? How have I, through the whole of a midsummer night, struggled to fathom it? What was it, that something more profound than the wells of Democritus, which lay far within the pupils of my beloved? What was it I possessed with the passion to discover those eyes, those large, those shining, those divine orbs? They became to me the twin stars of Leda, and to them, devoutest of astrologers. So there's a ton going on here. He's describing these eyes as both these brilliant, radiating things that project this light, but also as these black chasms. So you have the duality of this image. And this twin image is also highlighted at the end with the twin stars of Leda. The twin stars of Leda, Leda is raped by Zeus, and she gives birth to the Dioscuri, Gemini. And these are the twins. They representative of the Gemini fish, and they're set amongst the stars. And so we have this profound magic connected to the eyes. And there again, we have this image of the well and of the chasm, of digging down deep into it and being brought into this transformative abyss through these magic portals. And I love this line too. They were fuller than the fullest of the gazelle eyes of the tribe of the valley of Nur Jahad. I just thought it sounds so romantic, you know? The hue of the orbs was the most brilliant of black, and far over them hung jetty lashes of great length, but slightly irregular in outline, had the same tint. It's just such poetic beauty in this. And this is our thing that's strange about Ligeia. This is that unique piece of beauty in the Baconian sense, right? But again, it's about the expression of the eyes, not so much their shape or her physical features. It's the dark yet bright radiance, this duality. What do you think, Graham?
I think it's wonderful. The expression of the eyes, very important. I think that, a lot of people can evoke emotion from their gaze without saying anything or doing anything. It's a whole other form of communication.
And again, it connects us to this Medea energy, right? All of the people born to Medea have these eyes, right, that she gets from being related to Helios. And this image of the eyes is the one that projects this magic power, this dark witchcraft, which can transform people, you know? So she has this melodious voice of the siren, the name of the siren, this connection to that nymph in the cave in the waters, and now that this powerful eye image of the daughters of, or the children of Helios and his family, like Medea or Hecate or Circe. So let's continue. There is no point among the many incomprehensible anomalies of the science of mind more thrillingly exciting than the fact, never, I believe, noticed in the schools, that in our endeavors to recall memory, something long forgotten, we often find ourselves upon the very verge of remembrance, without being able, in the end, to remember. And thus, high frequently in my intense scrutiny of Ligeia's eyes have I felt approaching the full knowledge of their expression, felt it approaching, not quite be mine, and so at length entirely depart. And strange, O strangest mystery of all, I found in the commonest objects of the universe a circle of analogies to threat expression. I mean to say that subsequently to the period when Ligeia's beauty passed into my spirit, their dwelling as in a shrine, I derived from many existences in the material world a sentiment such as I had always aroused within me by her large and luminous orbs. So I just want to stop there for a second and just talk about this idea that he can't really always remember her or regard her eyes, and yet he would find like these metaphoric analogous things in the physical world that would take him immediately into the depths of her eyes, just perceiving inanimate objects and such. So it's such, again, this like really interesting, profound beauty that is this mysterious strangeness. And the fact that he can remember and gaze into her eyes, but he can never fully comprehend them. Again, it's this image of that depth of the abyss, of this blackness that's transformative and othering, and that can never be fully perceived, both being and non-being, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So I recognized it, let me repeat, sometimes in the survey of a rapidly growing vine, in the contemplation of a moth, a butterfly, a chrysalis, a stream of running water. I have felt it in the ocean, in the falling of a meteor. I have felt it in the glances of unusually aged people. And there are one or two stars in heaven, one especially, a star of the sixth magnitude, double and changeable, to be found near the large star in Lyra, in a telescopic scrutiny of which I have made aware of the feeling. I have been filled by it by certain sounds from stringed instruments, and not unfrequently by passages from books. I need to look up what that star is. I forgot to do that. But again, these images of the stars are so profound. In this drawing down of that star, of that goddess, that evening, I imagine it's probably connected to the evening star, because he already mentioned Astrophet, right? Astaroth, which is the evening star, that goddess Aphrodite, that Biblian Aphrodite, But it's such a powerful evocation of Ligeia, that she appears in the moth, in the butterfly, and all of these transformations, and the flow of creation, the running water of a stream, the falling of a meteor. Also, all of these images are images that are connected to that transformative mother goddess, right? The flow, that is your Rhea. The following meteor, that is our Cybele. She's often representative of the black stone. You see it in the glances of the unusually aged. As people are coming closer to death, they can perceive of the abyss of that darkness even more. It's just wild. All right. So do you have anything to say, or should I continue?
Let's keep going.
Okay. Among innumerable other instances, I well remember something in a volume of Joseph Glanville, which, perhaps merely from its quaintness, who shall say, never failed to inspire me with the sentiment, and the will therein lieth, which dieth not, who knoweth the mysteries of the will with its vigor. For God is but a great will, pervading all things by nature of its intentness. Man doth not yield him to the angels, nor unto death utterly, save only through the weakness of his feeble will. So again, it's this will to live, to transform, to grow that's connected with this. This quote says God, but it's clearly referencing that fiery goddess energy, you know? And I think we need to fundamentally acknowledge that these goddesses, god forms are beyond gender, you know? We're talking about the creatrix that is self-created out of herself. She's both the womb of creation, but is also the phallus that impregnates herself. So length of years and subsequent reflection have enabled me to trace indeed some remote connection between this passage in the English moralist and a portion of the character of Ligeia. An intensity in thought, action, or speech was possible in her a result or at least an index of that gigantic volition, which during our long intercourse failed to give other and more immediate evidence of its existence. Of all the women who I have ever known, she, the outwardly calm, the ever placid Ligeia, was the most violently a prey to the tumultuous vultures of stern passion. And of such passion I could form no estimate save by the miraculous expansion of those eyes, which at once so delighted and appalled me, by the almost magical melody, modulation, distinctness, and placidity of her very low voice, and by the fierce energy rendered doubly effective by contrast with her manner of utterance, of the wild words which she habitually uttered. So this being a fiery passion, of this tumultuous vultures of stern passion, that's such a good line. The miraculous expansion that delighted and appalled me, by the almost magical melody and modulation, distinctness and placidity. Like, there's so much power to this image of Ligeia, and it really makes me think again of this Medea, this woman who's driven by passion, both love and revenge and transformation, and just is in the throes of that magic of that eye, right?
And even the wild words which he habitually uttered sounds like incantation, right?
That's such a good point, right? She utters these magic spells, these weird, wild words that take you out of time and space.
Mm-hmm.
So I've spoken of the learning of Ligeia. It was immense, such as I have never known in woman. In the classical tongues was she deeply proficient, and as far as my own acquaintance extended in regard to the modern dialects of Europe, I have never known her at fault. Indeed, upon any theme of the most admired, because simply the most abstruse of the boasted erudition of the Academy, have I ever found Ligeia at fault. How singularly, how thrillingly this one point in the nature of my wife has forced itself at this late period only upon my attention. I said her knowledge was such that I have never known in woman, but where breathes the man who has traversed and successfully all the wide areas of moral, physical, and mathematical science? I saw not then what I now clearly perceive, that the acquisitions of Ligeia were gigantic, were astounding. Yet I was sufficiently aware of her infinite supremacy to resign myself with a childlike confidence to her guidance through the chaotic world of metaphysical investigation at which I most busily occupied during the earlier years of our marriage. With how vast a triumph, with how vivid a delight, with how much of all that is ethereal and hope, did I feel as she bent over me in studies but little sought, but less known, that delicious vista by slow degrees expanding before me, down whose long, gorgeous, and all untrodden path I might at length pass onward to the goal of a wisdom too divinely precious to not be forbidden. Just wild stuff. This image of Ligeia as this incredible giant of academic, and knowledge, just knowing of everything. And the fact that it's this teaching of the metaphysics and this revealing of the world deeply relates to the magic of the muse. You meet the muse and there's this gaining of wisdom and unveiling of knowledge, and there's this deep passion in the beginning. And as this unfolds, there becomes an understanding. And he's being transformed by this understanding. He's connecting deeply to that goddess energy. Very powerful. And it's important, right? This is a feminine energy that has more knowledge than anything else, right?
Hmm.
How poignant then must I have been? How poignant then must have been the grief with which, after some years, I beheld my well-grounded expectations take wing to themselves and fly away. Without Ligeia, I was but as a child groping benighted. Her presence, her reading alone, rendered vividly luminous the many mysteries of transcendentalism in which we were immersed, wanting the radiant luster of her eyes, letters lambent and golden, grew duller than Saturnian lead. And now those eyes shone less and less frequently upon the pages over which I pored. Ligeia grew ill. Wild eyes blazed with the too glorious effulgence. The pale fingers became of the transparent waxen hue of the grave, and the blue veins upon the lofty forehead swelled and sank impetuously with the tides of the gentle emotion. I saw that she must die, and I struggled desperately in spirit with grim Azrael. So Azrael, that's in Christian mythology, that's the angel of death, right? And we have so much powerful image, the magical letters turning to lambent into Saturnian lead, the fact that she gazes through his eyes, he feels her presence as he reads and consumes knowledge, but how that flair for this knowledge is dying with her, and he can understand that she's leaving him, that he's losing this profound connection. And the struggles of the passionate wife were, to my astonishment, even more energetic than my own. There had been much in her stern nature to impress me with the belief that, to her, death would have come without its terrors. But not so. Words are impotent to convey any just idea of the fierceness of resistance with which she wrestled with the shadow. I groaned in anguish at the pitiable spectacle. Would have soothed, I would have reasoned, but in the intensity of her wild desire for life, but for life, solace and reason were the utmost folly. Yet not until the last instance, amid the most convulsive writhings of her fierce spirit, was shaken the external placidity of her demeanor. Her voice grew more gentle, grew more low, yet I would not wish to dwell upon the wild meaning of the quietly uttered words. So you see her fighting, struggling to survive, to be a presence in his life. And this makes me think of the story of Jason and Medea, where in the Argonautica version of the story especially, you have this rising action where Medea starts becoming more and more of a aggressive force, and she starts acting more and more of her own volition. And then this kind of terrifies Jason, and he tries to leave, but it's that spurning of her, and it's that trying to take matters into his own hands that winds up bringing up the ultimate tragedy, where their children become destroyed and where she winds up having to flee on her chariot of fire. And Jason is left alone with nothing, and all of that violence happens. So there's this thing with the muse, where the muse becomes more and more invested in life, becomes more transformative, and starts to take over. And it seems here that there's a disconnect with the author or the narrator. Why are they not being able to connect to Ligeia anymore? What's happening, right? My brain reeled as I hearkened entranced to a melody more than mortal, to assumptions and aspirations which mortality had never before known. That she loved me, I should not have doubted, and I might have been easily aware that in a bosom such as hers, love would have reigned, no ordinary passion. But in death only was I fully impressed with the strength of her affection. For long hours, detaining in my hand, would she pour out before me the overflowing of a heart whose more than passionate devotion amounted to idolatry. How had I deserved to be so blessed by such confessions? How had I deserved to be so cursed with the removal of my beloved in the hour of her making them? But upon this subject I cannot bear to dilate. Let me say only that in Ligeia's more than womanly abandonment to a love, alas, all unmerited, all unworthy bestowed, I at length recognized the principle of her longing. Was so widely earnest a desire for the life which was now fleeing so rapidly away. It is this wild longing, it is this eager vehemence of desire for life, but for life, that I have no power to portray, no utterance capable of expressing.
Mm.
So I wanted to point out that she also idolizes the narrator, right? And the narrator uses that term idolization, and that she reveals this in a confession as she tries to cling to life and tries to cling to this passionate rebirth, right? Like there's like this vehemence and this desire that's so overwhelming in her character. At high noon of the night in which she departed, beckoning me peremptorily to her side, she bade me repeat certain verses composed by herself not many days before. I obeyed her. They were these. So this is a poem called The Conqueror Worm. So it's a poem within the story. Lo, 'tis a gala night, within the lonesome latter years, an angel throng be wind be light, in veils and drowned in tears. Sit in a theater to see a play of hope and fears, while the orchestra breathes fitfully the music of the spheres. Mimes in the fort of God on high mutter and mumble low, and hither and thither fly. Mere puppets they who come and go at bidding of vast formless things that shift the scenery to and fro, flapping from out their condor wings, invisible woe. That motley drama, oh be sure, it shall not be forgot, with its phantom chased forevermore by a crowd that sees it not. Through a circle that ever returneth, in the self-same spot, and much of madness and more of sin, and the horror the soul of the plot. But see amid the mimic root, a crawling shape intrude, a blood-red thing that writhes from out the scenic solitude. It writhes, with mortal pangs the mimes become its food, and the seraphs sob at the vermin fangs in human gore imbued. Out are the lights, out all, and overreach its quivering form. The curtain of funeral pall comes down with the rush of a storm, and the angels, all pallid and wan, uprising, unveiling, affirm that the play is the tragedy man, and its hero, the conqueror worm. So this is such an intense poem. What do you think, Graham?
Very intense. There's a lot of imagery to unpack there.
Right? The key image I want people to get out of this is that this idea of the conquering worm that recycles the flesh and consumes the dead and transforms us into something new. This essence of the cycles, and this is kind of profound coming from Ligeia, who, as we're seeing in the play, there's more to her death, right? And here she's talking about death as this finality in which people are consumed and transformed by these red worms. So powerful, powerful image. So let us continue. Oh God, half shrieked Ligeia, leaping to her feet and extending her arms aloft with a spasmodic movement. As I made an end of these lines, O God, O divine Father, shall these things be undeviantly so? Shall this conqueror be not once conquered? Are we not part and parcel in thee? Who knoweth the mysteries of the will with its vigor? Man doth not yield him to angels, nor unto death utterly, save only through the weakness of his feeble will. So again, we have that Glanville quote, this time in the mouth of Ligeia as she's on her deathbed screaming, calling out and trying to force her will, this will that will persist potentially from beyond the grave. Powerful stuff. So she's rebelling against that conqueror worm, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And now, as if exhausted with emotion, she suffered her white arms to fall and returned solemnly to her bed of death. And as she breathed her last sighs, there came mingled with them a low murmur from her lips. I bent them my ear and distinguished again the concluding words of the passage in Glanville. Man doth not yield to him the angels, nor unto death utterly, save only through the weakness of his feeble will. Her last words were this struggle for life, this desire to persist, you know, and that's such a magical image of the image of the muses and of the mystery. This idea of persisting through the cycles of death and destruction, of reincarnation, and achieving that ionic life outside of time and space. She died, and I crushed into the valley of dust with sorrow, could no longer endure the lonely desolation of my dwelling in the dim and decaying city by the Rhine. I had no lack of what the world calls wealth. Ligeia had brought me far more, very far more than ordinarily falls to the lot of mortals. After a few months, therefore, of weary and aimless wandering, I purchased and put some repair an abbey which I shall not name, in one of the wildest and least frequented portions of fair England. So after her death, he buys this mansion and takes off. Oops. Okay, where are we at? There we are. Sorry. The gloomy and dreary grandeur of the building, the almost savage aspect of the domain, the many melancholy and time-honored memories connected with both had much in unison with the feelings of utter abandonment, which had driven me into that remote and unsocial region of the country. Yet, although the external abbey with its verdant decay hanging about it suffered but little alteration, I gave way with a childlike perversity, and perchance with a faint hope of alleviating my sorrows, to a display of more than regal magnificence within. For such follies, even in childhood, I had imbibed a taste, and now they came back to me as if in the dotage of grief. Alas, I feel how much even of incipient madness might have been discovered in the gorgeous and fantastic draperies, in the solemn carvings of Egypt, in the wild cornices and furniture, in the bedlam patterns of the carpets of tufted gold. I had become a bounden slave in the trammels of opium, and my labors and my orders had taken a coloring from my dreams. But these absurdities must not pause to detail. Let me speak only that one chamber, ever accursed, whither in a moment of mental alienation I led from the altar as my bride, as the successor of the unforgotten Ligeia, the fair-haired and blue-eyed Lady Rowena Travion of Tremaine. So let's get the scene here. It's a little bit crazy. So Ligeia dies. He runs out into the backwoods of England with his millions, his vast wealth. He buys this old abandoned abbey, and he lets it remain in this state of disrepair on the outside, but in the inside, through his opium-induced dreams, he decorates it in all of this drapery and Egypt kind of imagery. And also, he finds himself another wife, the fair-haired, blue-eyed Rowena, right? Blonde and blue-eyed, almost the complete opposite of Ligeia, with her dark raven hair and black eyes, And this woman he immediately brings to his altar that he created through these opium-induced dreams, right? His orders were taken a coloring from my dreams because he was a slave in the trammels of opium, right? And we know that drugs bring these visions and this connection to the muse. So what's going on with this room? What's going on with Lady Rowena Trevanion? There is no individual portion of the architecture and decoration of that bridal chamber which is not visibly before me. Where were the souls of the haughty family of the bride when, through thirst of gold, they permitted to pass the threshold of an apartment so bedecked, a maiden and a daughter so beloved? I have said that I minutely remember the details of the chamber, yet I am sadly forgetful on topics of deep moment. And here there was no system, no keeping in the fantastic display to take hold upon the memory. The room lay in a high turret of the castellated abbey. It was pentagonal in shape and of capacious size. So it's in this castle. That's an image we have of Cybele and of Rhea, often depicted with the castle upon her head, of the crenulated kind of form. And it's a pentagon. The room is a pentagon, right? An image of our star, a pentagram, from which it's an altar that he's going to place his bride. Okay, an immense sheet of unbroken glass from Venice, a single pane and tainted tinted of leaden hue, so that the rays of either the sun or moon passing through it fell with a ghastly luster on the objects within. Over the upper portion of this huge window extended the trellis work of an aged vine, which clambered up the massy walls of the turret, the ceiling of gloomy-looking oak, with excessively lofty, vaulted, and elaborately fretted with the wildest and most grotesque specimens of a semi-Gothic, semi-Druidical device. From out the most central recess of this melancholy vaulting, depended by a single chain of gold with long links, a huge censer of the same metal, Saracenic in pattern, and with many perforations so contrived that there writhed in and out of them, as if endued with the serpent vitality, a continual succession of party-colored fires. So he's transforming this room into like a magical altar space, right? He's got this wild druidical device that is a censer that's spewing serpentine smoke. It's in this vaulted castle. It's pentagonal in shape. It's all gothic and grotesque. And the lights are these dancing magical fires. What's going on in this room, Poe? Some few ottomans and golden candelabra of Eastern figure were in various stations about, and there was the couch too, bridal couch, of an Indian model, and low and sculptured of solid ebony, with a pall-like canopy above. And each of the angles of the chamber stood on end a gigantic sarcophagus of black granite, from the tombs of the kings over against Luxor, with their aged lids full of immemorial sculpture. But in the draping of the apartment lay, alas, the chief fantasy of all, the lofty walls, gigantic in height, even unproportionably so, were hung from the summit to foot in vast folds with a heavy and massive-looking tapestry of a material which was found alike as a carpet on the floor, as a covering for the ottomans and the ebony bed, as a canopy for the bed, and as the gorgeous volutes of the curtains which partially shaded the window. So I just want to take a minute to look at this room. It's got giant sarcophaguses in the 5 corners, okay? The walls are ginormous to the point of being unproportional and distorting of image. And they're draped with these massive red tapestries, which flow in this canopy. He's got this gigantic Indian bridal bed that's in this black ebony wood that's carved with all of these images. The sarcophaguses have all of this magical imagery. He's got these windows that are letting in the light, and it's shining on these tapestries and making everything look all wild. And then the smoke is obscuring it too, right? The material was the richest cloth of gold. It was spotted all over at irregular intervals with arabesque figures, about a foot in diameter and wrought upon the cloth and patterns of the most jetty black. But these figures partook of the true character of the arabesque only when regarded from a single point of view, by a contrivance now common and indeed traceable to a very remote period of antiquity. They were made changeable in aspect. To one entering the room, they bore the appearance of simple monstrosities, but upon a farther advance, this appearance gradually departed, and step by step, as the visitor moved his station in the chamber, he saw himself surrounded by an endless succession of the ghastly forms which belong to the superstition of the Norman, or arise in the guilty slumbers of the monk. So you have these people that transform into these ghastly, monstrous shapes as you enter the chamber and gaze upon them more closely. Like, what an intense Gothic room, right? And no one describes something better than Poe when it comes to this stuff. And this is both a bridal and a death chamber. This is an altar, right? A sacrificial room almost, a pentagonal star. It's surrounded by the images of demons in red and gold. Okay. The phantasmagoric effect was vastly heightened by the artificial introduction of a strong continual current of wind behind the draperies, giving a hideous and uneasy animation to the whole. So even these figures appeared to like animate and come in and out of form with the wind. In halls such as these, in a bridal chamber such as this, I passed with the Lady of Tremaine. The unhallowed hours of the first month of our marriage passed them with but little disquietude. That my wife dreaded the fierce moodiness of my temper, that she shunned me and loved me but little, I could not help but perceiving. But it gave me rather pleasure than otherwise. I loathed her with a hatred belonging more to demon than to man. My memory flew back. Oh, with what intensity of regret! To Ligeia, the beloved August, the beautiful, the entombed. So I want to talk and single out this image because this takes us back to those references I made to the hymn of the Mother of Gods, where we're seeing Attis now. He's abandoned the muse, right? The narrator's taking on this Attis type form, and he's connecting with this lady Rowena, right? This is not someone he loves, but yet he's being bound. And she's this deathly, wet thing that brings up this intensity of hatred. And all he can do is think back to Lady Ligeia. And I feel so bad for Rowena in all of this because she's even more reduced to less of an image than Ligeia, where Ligeia was only this figure of beauty and knowledge and revealing who had no past or no identity. Rowena is just an object of hatred and a poor replacement, you know? I reveled in recollections of her purity, of her wisdom, of her ethereal nature, of her passion, her idolatrous love. Now then did my spirit fully and freely burn with more than all the fires of her own. In the excitement of my opium dreams, for I was habitually fettered in the shackles of the drug, I would call aloud her name during the silence of the night, or among the sheltered recesses of the glens by day, as if through the wild eagerness, the solemn passion, the consuming ardor of my longing for the departed, could restore her to the pathway she had abandoned. Ah, could it be forever upon the earth? So again, we see he's taking of these opium and he's being brought back to Ligeia. And he's having these dreams and these images of what? Of her returning, of her coming back to life. So he is subconsciously created this magical altar chamber. He's brought his new wife upon it with this venomous hatred and disregard. And now he's caught up in this further images and this connection with this Ligeia, the memory of her, and this imagining of restoring her back to life. About the commencement of the second month of the marriage, the Lady Rowena was attacked with sudden illness, from which her recovery was slow. The fever which consumed her rendered her nights uneasy, and in her perturbed state of half slumber, she spoke of sounds and of motions, in and about the chamber of the turret, which I concluded had no origin save in the distemper of her fancy, or perhaps in the phantasmagoric influences of the chamber itself. She became at length convalescent, finally well. Yet by a brief period elapsed ere a second more violent disorder again threw her upon a bed of suffering. And from this attack, her frame at all times feeble, never altogether recovered. Her illnesses were after this epoch of alarming character, and of more alarming recurrence, defying alike the knowledge and the great exertions of her physicians. With the increase of the chronic disease which had thus apparently taken too sure hold upon her constitution to be eradicated by human means, I could not fail to observe a similar increase in the nervous irritation of her temperament, and in her excitability by trivial causes of fear. She spoke again and now more frequently and pertinaciously of the sounds of the slight sounds and of the unusual motion among the tapestries to which she had formerly alluded. So we see like the narrator connecting the bridal chamber and the weirdness of the chamber to bringing about this illness almost upon Rowena, right? She first comes down with it, then it leaves her only to come back even worse than before. And then the second time she finds herself bound to the bed and now haunted by the images of the tapestries, right? And the sound. She's now talking, alluding to the sound. and remember the low, melodious voice of Ligeia, right?
Mhm.
One night, near the closing in of September, she pressed this distressing subject with more than usual emphasis upon my attention. She had just awakened from an unquiet slumber, and I had been watching with feelings half of anxiety, half of vague terror, the working of her emaciated countenance. I sat by the side of her ebony bed upon one of the ottomans of India. She partly arose and spoke in an earnest low whisper of sounds which she had then heard, but which I could not hear, of motions which she then saw, but which I could not perceive. The wind was rushing hurriedly behind the tapestries, and I wished to show her what, let me confess it, I could not all believe, that those almost inarticulate breathings and those very gentle variations of the figures upon the wall were but the natural effects of the customary rushing of the wind. But a deadly pallor overspreading her face had proved to me that my exertions to reassure her would be fruitless. She appeared to be fainting, and no attendants were within call. I remembered where was deposited a decanter of light wine, which had been ordered by her physicians, and hastened across the chamber to procure it. But as I stepped beneath the light of the censer, two circumstances of a startling nature attracted my attention. I had felt that some palpable, although invisible object had passed lightly by my person, and I saw that there lay upon the golden carpet in the very middle of the rich luster thrown from the censer a shadow, a faint, indefinite shadow of angelic aspect, such as might be fancied for the shadow of a shade. But I was wild with the excitement of an immoderate dose of opium, and heeded things but little, nor spoke of them to Rowena. Having found the wine, I recrossed the chamber and poured out a goblet full, which I held to the lips of the fainting lady. So now we're seeing these specters, this ghost potentially arising into a physical form. But he keeps dismissing it. It was just the wind playing upon the tapestries. Lady Rowena is going mad with her illness. And then when he even sees it himself, he says, no, this is because of my opium indulgence, right? I'm just dreaming and misseeing things. But it's a powerful image that we got to remember. She had now partially recovered, however, and she took the vessel herself, while I sank upon an ottoman near me, with my eyes fastened upon her person. It was then that I became distinctly aware of a gentle footfall upon the carpet, and near the couch, and in a second thereafter, as Rowena was in the act of raising the wine to her lips, I saw, or may have dreamed that I saw, fall within the goblet, as if from some invisible spring in the atmosphere of the room, 3 or 4 large drops of a brilliant and ruby-colored fluid. So I want to just pause here, because remember when we were talking again about the hymn to the Mother of the Gods, and we talked about the beast, the lion, that comes and helps to release Attis from the bonds of the nymph, from this death and depression, and how that beast is often a drug reference, how it's a reference to the theriac. Here we're seeing that drug, that ruby red beast that's now being placed into this decanter. Okay? And it's about to fight against this nymph image. And I also want to contrast this with the elixir of life from alchemy, which is often depicted as a ruby red elixir, and as well as the blood of the Christ that we see in Christian imagery, the Eucharist. There's a lot going on here, but I believe first and foremost he's referencing that theriac, that beast. Okay, so it says, if this I saw not so Rowena, she swallowed the wine unhesitatingly, and I forbore to speak to her of a circumstance which much after all I considered, have been but the suggestion of a vivid imagination, rendered morbidly active by the terror of the lady, by the opium, and by the hour. Yet I cannot conceal it from my own perception that immediately subsequent to the fall of the ruby drops, a rapid change for the worse took place in the disorder of my wife, so that on the 3rd subsequent night, the hands of her menials, prepared for her the tomb, and on the fourth I sat alone with her shrouded body in that fantastic chamber which had received her as my bride. Wild visions, opium engendered, flitted like shadow-like before me. I gazed with unquiet eye upon the sarcophagi in the angles of the room, upon the varying figures of the drapery, and upon the writhing of the parti-colored fires in the censer overhead. My eyes then fell as I called to mind the circumstances of a former night, to the spot beneath the glare of the censer where I had seen the faint traces of the shadow. So he's seeing her now like this she's being poisoned by this dark image that's coming to do what? What's going to happen? It was there, however, no longer, and breathing with greater freedom, I turned my glances to the pallid and rigored figure upon the bed. Then rushed upon me 1,000 memories of Ligeia, and then came back upon my heart with the turbulent violence of a flood, the whole of that unutterable woe, with which I had regarded her thus enshrouded. The night waned, and still, with a bosom full of bitter thoughts of the one and only supremely beloved, I remained gazing upon the body of Rowena. So he's now starting to imagine Ligeia in Rowena's form. He's so in love with Ligeia still, he can't even regard the death of his wife. It might have been midnight, or perhaps earlier, or later, for I had taken no note of time, when a sob, low, gentle, but very distinct, startled me from my reverie. I felt that it came from the bed of ebony, the bed of death. I listened in an agony of superstitious terror, but there was no repetition of the sound. I strained my vision to detect any motion in the corpse, but there was not the slightest perceptible, yet I could not have been deceived. I had heard the noise, however faint, and my soul was awakened within me. I absolutely and perseveringly kept my attention riveted upon the body. Many minutes elapsed before any circumstance occurred tending to throw light upon the mystery. At length it became evident that a very feeble and barely noticeable tinge of color had flushed up within the cheeks and along the sunken small veins of the eyelids. Through a species of unutterable horror and awe, for which the language of mortality has no sufficiently energetic expression, I felt my heart cease to beat, my limbs grow rigid where I sat. Yet a sense of duty finally operated to restore my self-possession. So he's seeing life being restored to her cold flesh, right after he thinks of and imagines Ligeia. I could no longer doubt that we had been precipitate in our perceptions, that Rowena still lived. It was necessary that some immediate exertion be made, yet Turret was altogether apart from the portion of the abbey tenanted by the servants. There were none within call. I had no means of summoning them to my aid without leaving the room for many minutes, and this I could not venture to do so. I therefore struggled alone in my endeavors to call back the spirit ill hovering. In a short period, it was certain, however, that a relapse had taken place. The color disappeared from both eyelids and cheek, leaving a wanness even more than that of marble. The lips became doubly shriveled and pinched up in the ghastly expression of death. A repulsive clamminess and coldness overspread rapidly the surface of the body, and all the usual rigorous illness immediately supervened. I fell back with a shudder upon the couch from which I had been so startlingly aroused, and again gave myself up to passionate waking visions of Ligeia. So his mind drifts off and thinks about how he can save her, and the life immediately leaves her. So now he starts reimagining Ligeia again. An hour thus elapsed when, could it be possible? I was a second time aware of some vague sound issuing from the region of the bed. I listened in extremity of horror. The sound came again. It was a sigh rushing to the corpse. Distinctly saw, a tremor upon the lips. In a minute afterwards, they relaxed, disclosing a bright line of the pearly teeth. Amazement now struggled in my bosom with the profound awe which had hitherto reigned there alone. I felt that my vision grew dim, that my reason wandered, and it was only by a violent effort that I at length succeeded in nerving myself to the task which duty thus once more had pointed out. There was now a partial glow upon the forehead and upon the cheek and throat. A perceptible warmth pervaded the whole frame. There was even a slight pulsation at the heart. The lady lived, and with redoubled ardor I betook myself to the task of restoration. I chafed and bathed the temples and the hands, and used every exertion which experience and no little medical reading could suggest. But in vain. Suddenly the color fled, the pulsation ceased, the lips resumed the expression of the dead, and in an instant afterward the whole body took upon itself the icy chillness, the livid hue, the intense rigidity, the sunken outline, and all the loathsome peculiarities of that which has been for many days a tenant of the tomb. So again, we see the same thing unfold. As soon as he starts thinking of Rowena and trying to save her, and the image of Ligeia leaves, the life that was coming into the body starts to leave again. And I again sunk into visions of Ligeia. And again, what marvel that I shudder while I write. Again there reached my ears a low sob for the region of the ebony bed. But why shall I minutely detail the unspeakable horror of that night? Why shall I pause to relate how time after time, until near the period of the gray dawn, this hideous drama of revivification was repeated, how each terrific relapse was only into a sterner and apparently more irredeemable death, how each agony wore the aspect of a struggle with some invisible foe, and how each struggle was succeeded by I know not what of wild change in the personal appearance of the corpse. Let me hurry to a conclusion. So it's this ongoing struggle between Rowena and Ligeia for control over this body. It seems like and for death and for life. It's this duality going on, and he's perceiving it. And every time he tries to intervene, things get worse. The greater part of the fearful night had worn away, and she who had been dead once again stirred, and now more vigorously than hitherto, although arousing from a dissolution more appalling in its utter hopelessness than any. I had long ceased to struggle or to move, and remained sitting rigidly upon the ottoman, a helpless prey to a whirl of violent emotions, of which extreme awe was perhaps the least terrible, the least consuming. The corpse, I repeat, stirred, and now more vigorously than before. The hues of life flushed up with unwonted energy into the countenance. The limbs relaxed, and save that the eyelids were yet pressed heavily together, and that the bandages and draperies of the grave still imparted their charnel character to the figure, I might have dreamed that Rowena had indeed shaken off utterly the fetters of death. But this idea was not, even then, altogether adopted. I could at least doubt no longer, when arising from the bed, tottering with feeble steps, with closed eyes, and with the manner of one bewildered in a dream, the thing that was enshrouded advanced boldly and palpably into the middle of the apartment. So here she's literally arisen from the dead and is walking as one of those corpses in a burial shroud. And I wanted to highlight the similarity of this image to the first poem we read, to Dreamland, when he sees those people in the underworld enshrouded in burial shrouds, walking. I trembled not, I stirred not, for a crowd of unutterable fancies connected with the air, the stature, the demeanor of the figure, rushing hurriedly through my brain, had paralyzed, had chilled me into stone. I stirred not, but gazed upon the apparition. There was a mad disorder in my thoughts, a tumult unappeasable. Could it indeed be the living Rowena who confronted me? Could it indeed be Rowena at all? The fair-haired, the blue-eyed lady Rowena Trevanion of Tremaine? Why should I doubt it? The bandage lay heavily about the mouth. But might it not be the mouth of the breathing lady Tremaine? And the cheeks there were the roses as in her noon of life? Yes, there might indeed be the fair cheeks of the living lady of Tremaine, and the chin with its dimples, as in health, might it not be hers? But had she then grown taller since her malady? What inexpressible madness seized me with that thought? One bound, and I had reached her feet. Shrinking from my touch, she let fall from her head, unloosened the ghastly cerements which had confined it. And there streamed forth into the rushing atmosphere of the chamber huge masses of long and disheveled hair. It was blacker than the raven wings of the midnight. And now slowly opened the eyes of the figure which stood before me. Here then at least I shrieked aloud. Can I never be mistaken? These are the full and the black and the wild eyes of my lost love, of the lady Ligeia. And that's how the story ends, with
Wow.
this physical transformation of the body of Lady Rowena into the body of Ligeia, where she actually changes physical forms, her eyes, her hair. Such a profound kind of intensity in this vampiric almost character, right? And this possession of the body and this destruction. What do you think, Graham, now that we've read all of Ligeia together?
What do I think? I was not expecting that many references to classical stuff, but it makes sense because you read a lot of that. But it's just interesting seeing it so in the forefront in the story compared to a lot of his other works. Um, Very interesting and haunting. Haunting story.
It is haunting, and it's such an interesting and powerful one. It's like, I think it really talks about the connection to the muse and how it is through these drug-induced visions, through these dreams, that the connection begins. And then it becomes far more palpable and real until the point where it can take on this possession, right? Like, he's talking about basically engaging in this kind of sacrificial magic that is also very reminiscent of that story of Addis, of breaking free of the material. I feel like Lady Rowena is not so much a woman as the material world, as this connection to trying to have a place and to not allowing yourself to be transformed by this, monstrous divine feminine that defies death and defies reason, right? That is Ligeia. And it's almost like he loses her because he's so bound down to the earth and to trying to gain this knowledge. And then she comes back in his moments of his most drug-induced wildness, right? When he's depressed and he's trying to break free of it. It's sad what happens to Lady Rowena as a result. But it's also wild because all of this imagery about him creating the chamber to be this sacrificial altar, and then he puts her upon it and she becomes sacrificed, right? She takes that theriac, that magic potion that's placed into her by apparitions, that she then has died and been reborn. It's wild stuff.
Very wild.
And it's not a story I feel like a lot of people talk about with Poe, right? People like to talk about the more you have a similar thing in The Raven with the loss of a woman, but The Raven is more about that eeriness and the uncertainty that happens, right? I guess you have a similar story in The Fall of the House of Usher, which we want to talk about, another death of a powerful woman, and in Morella with the death and rebirth, but this time with a child through the mother, but it's this ongoing theme about this connection to this divine feminine energy and then losing that connection, either having it taken from you through death. Like, I think it's also partly symbolic about Poe's own life and the loss of the women in his life, like his mother and his wife, Virginia, and his struggles to make these true connections or to have them and then have them ripped away, and this desire to bring them back and this striving and longing for this divine form that can never be truly grasped. Or when it is grasped, it's this terrifying force that rises from the dead, So What do you think that I'm onto it though with my connections? You see what I was going for with the muse and with the nymphs and with Attis.
Yeah, after you pointed it out, it's like glaringly obvious.
It's funny because when I was reading a lot of this stuff, you see all these people wondering if it's just pure dream and pure drug, and I'm like, kind of. You're almost there, you know. It's like, yes, it is that, but it's also real, you know. And this is that magic that we're talking about, and the drugs are necessary for that invocation, you know.
Yeah,
And
entheogen.
right, it's an entheogen, and then these magical rites and the creation of this pentagonal space, this, you know, it's his necromantic trench in the altar which he places his new wife upon. Like, there's deep profound imagery going on here. And I love, you know, all of his references that he makes, you know, like to the daughters of Delos, those three Bacchic women who transform into doves, and this transformation too, like the women, you know, we see this twice with the Greek allegories that he takes, where the people don't actually die because of the love and the will and the love that is had for them. They're instead transformed in form. You know, the daughters of Delos, they become these doves. Hyacinthus becomes the hyacinth plant. You know, we see with Ligeia, because of her will and her lust for life, and also the love that the narrator has for her, she's able to come back to life. You know, she's able to reincarnate in these cycles through stealing the life of this other woman in this vampiric kind of rate. But she does do it. She does do it. But yeah, so that's my take on the story of Ligeia and earlier of Dreamland. I believe that they're both referencing like this descent into the underworld, this transformation, and the taking of the dead and bringing them back. This, you know, magical connection with the muse and with this character of Medea that we see referenced in many different ways, and through the nymphs and the sirens, you know. Do you have any last comments or thoughts to say about Ligeia or Dreamland, Graham?
Not sure what else to add to it. I think it's a lot to take in.
Yeah, it's a lot to think in, right? Think about the magic that's at play here in this dark feminine aspect, right? This powerful Astarte, this Astrophale, or what is it, Astrophet that he names, you know, that sex and war red goddess that comes back with the beast that is the Theriac, that brings us ionic life, that transforms through the sacrifice the dead into rebirth. Like, there's so much intense mystic imagery at play for those with ears to hear. So go listen to Ligeia again. You know, we did a recording of it. There's also links if you wish to read it. It's a profound story. I also recommend everyone check out more Edgar Allan Poe. If you're looking for more of this kind of muse magic, check out Morella and the Fall of the House of Usher, as well as Bernice, Lenore. It's such a constant theme in Poe. You'll find it in The Raven. There's Pallas Athena for those with ears to hear. So go dig into more Poe. I'm sure we'll be back with more Poe. But before we leave, Graham, you have some new projects coming up in the future that we should talk about. You have your short story project that you're working on.
A short story project.
And with your fragments and everything.
Yeah, so I just published it actually. I have the copies.
Beautiful.
Right here. I'll grab it. It's called "You Only Die Once," and it's a collection of short prose fiction passages, and then not really with a central theme. And then it ends with a one-act play that I wrote in university that follows around the concept of mental illness and psychosis and hospitalization.
I love it.
It's really just a fun exploration of some ideas that I had that I didn't really have any other place for, but they felt like at home together.
Right. Yeah, no, I'm excited to dig into it. We have to do an episode when you have time. That's the other thing. We do have another episode coming up with Searching for Dragons. This one we're excited about. Graham, you recently got through Infinity Land Press, The New Revelations of Being, the mystical writings of Antonin Artaud. Do you want to talk about this text and what we're looking at?
So it's a more recent translation of his text. So there's a New Revelations of Being, which is the text he wrote in 1937, and he published it just as the Revealed One and not under his own name. And it's a tarot prophecy that he enacted of the end of the world and its rebirth. And then there's also a few other essays as well involving different mystical aspects of other societies and sort of connecting them all together, seeing like the one kind of in every, finding common images among many different cultures and societies and tying them together. And this, I have an older translation of these works, published as The Death of Satan and Other Mystical Writings. But it's really musty. I've read it once, but it was too hard to engage with because of my allergies. So I was really excited when Infinity Land Press brought this new translation to the forefront, because it feels much tighter as a translation, first of all. And second of all, it includes a bunch of letters that he wrote around this time, as well as a wonderful introduction. And then it also has a new essay that's included that wasn't in the earlier translation that I have, called The Eternal Betrayal by the Whites, which I'm very excited to read. That's the last part of the book I need to get through, and while I'm taking my notes. But
so we're going to be talking about this book next Saturday, and it's going to be so much fun. I'm so excited because, like you're saying, this is where Artaud sort of formulates and writes about his own magical path and his own perspective, and how he, like we say, takes these images and these similar ideas from various traditions, and he kind of forges them into his own magical working. So this is the master at work in terms of that creative magical process. And we're going to have fun because Artaud is so well read and so well traveled, right? Like, he went to South America, he was initiated there. So you have all that stuff. You have all this French esotericism. You have all of this religious iconography. He talks about the Tao. He talks about Satan. It's a really in-depth text from what you've shown me.
It's powerful stuff, and really tarot as well. He uses one of the earliest forms of tarot, as you were saying.
Yeah, the Marseille deck.
Tarot de Marseille, yeah. So very Artaud to try to go as close to the original source as possible, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's going to be a fun episode, so make sure you all come and tune in for that. You also just released new music with your band, right?
Yeah, so we released the single from our upcoming EP, which is titled Ick, the Debilitating Effects of Ichthyophthirius multifilius and Osteichthyes. And it's, or Ick for short, and it's about my old freshwater tropical fish that I had when I was younger, and they all died, or most of them, the remaining ones died from this. Ick is a parasitic infection in boned fish. And so it infected a lot of my fish and they all died. And the album is about my attempts to save them.
Wow. What intense imagery, and something from childhood that is so powerful. So that's fun. And you guys are also working on a new project coming up too, right? You were telling me about.
That's going to be an EP. And that'll be coming out the next couple months. And we're already writing the next release, which will tentatively be titled "He Crackles Because He Is Coming Apart," and it's an entire it's an invocation of an essay by Artaud titled "The Life and Death of Satan the Fire," and it's a retelling of the death of Satan, essentially.
Amazing.
Yes. So I'm excited for that.
Anything Satan, and I'm there. So, and our tone also, yeah. And you guys rock. Really awesome, kind of progressive heavy metal with kind of black and death metal elements. Really amazing stuff. Great clean vocals as well. Worth checking out. And you're also releasing. Have you had any other releases you want to talk about for your publishing, or?
The only thing we've already mentioned them, I guess, is Sacred Armaments, Essential for Vanquishing Psychiatric Demons, and Methysteni. Those will both be coming out later in February.
Right.
Those are two very magical texts that we've talked about on the channel. I'm very excited to put them out into the world.
Yeah, they're amazing works. We had so much fun. If you go onto the channel, you can see we did deep dives into both of those, and it's about Graham's magical practice, and how you use magic to try to confront mental illness and the pain and suffering which you feel, and you create magical weapons to protect you, or you do magic to defeat these demons that are personified. It's powerful stuff and really intense, beautiful work. So everyone should check that out. If you go to the links below, there will be a link tree for all of Graham's stuff, and this is done through his publishing house, Things in My Chest. So someone is asking if you could repeat the band name one more time.
It's The Isosceles Infection is the band name.
Perfect. Okay. So other than that, we have tomorrow, I'm doing the next Occult Explorers on cranial mysteries, which is going to be fun. And fingers crossed, Ammon may be joining us. We've been chatting with him. He also has a bunch of interviews he's doing. So that's going to be a wild episode, though. We're going to talk about elongated skulls, beheadings, shrinking heads, magic rites involving heads as totems. Yeah, it gets dark and weird and crazy. So thank you, everyone, for tuning in. This was so much fun. Go read some Poe, whether it's the poetry or whether it's the short stories. Poe is a genius, and there's magic to be had in connection to this red goddess, this powerful Medea, Lady Babylon, if you have the ears to hear. Any last words from you, Graham?
May love guide your will.
Beautiful. May you, like Medea, or like Ligeia, have a will strong enough to persist after death, and have a lover who can resurrect you in an opium dream. Okay, everyone. Peace, love, hail Satan. Until next time, we're searching for dragons, and we will leave you with a outro song here from Graham.
Master could be, and I pressed my eye eagerly to the grave, and I wondered who his master could be, and I pressed my eye eagerly to the grave, and I wondered who his master could be, and I pressed my eye eagerly to the grave, and I wondered who his master could be, and I pressed my eye eagerly to the grave, and I wondered who his master could be, and I pressed my eye eagerly to the grave. And I wondered who his master could